Thought it was perhaps worth talking a little bit about the background to this video before I start talking in detail about how to actually replace the tyres. I was donated this non-functioning HBS9-4 bandsaw, and it was clear that the urethane bands were cracked, in many cases have fallen off and definitely needed to be replaced. There are a number of issues that I encountered. The first one was the tyres appeared to be only available from the USA, and the urethane tyres that the machine was fitted with needed to be heated to get them onto the pulley wheels, and people had a lot of difficulty with this. However, recently I noticed that the rubber tyres were available from a UK supplier at a very reasonable price, so I thought I'd try them. So the saw itself appears to be a design that's rebadged by a number of companies, so the good news is this video will hopefully be helpful for owners of these generic designs as well. It's certainly not meant to be a replacement manual. The motivation is to show the installation of the rubber tyres is no more difficult than changing saw blades, and most importantly identify that it really does work, as these are a different material, and to discuss how difficult they are to fit. This is the HBS9-4 bandsaw. I believe that there's nothing wrong with it except that the tyres that go on the pulley wheels are cracked and faded and really need to be replaced. We're having difficulty looking at them, but we found some down there, and these are the details of the actual tyres themselves. So there's the tyres that we're going to fit. And first of all we need to move the covers, so the catch that needs to be undone, one up the top two, and that reveals the pulley wheels. You can see here that on this pulley wheel there's a little brush, and you can also see the groove that the tyre runs in. There's the groove again. At the moment you can see the blade as well. There's the tyre, and that fits into that recess on the perimeter of the pulley wheel. Unfortunately, the manual is a very small booklet with an associated font size that's very small as well. That makes it difficult for someone with my eyesight to be able to read it easily. So what I did was I scanned it in and bumped up the font size by printing it out on A4 paper. And here's a couple of examples of the pages that I got out. This made it much easier to read the manual and was quite helpful for me. Armed with a manual with a large font, the first job was to check the motor is still functioning as expected. We wouldn't expect to see the saw band moving because that will be loose because the tyres have disintegrated. So we'll switch the motor on. And the blade is not rotating, but clearly the motor is working, which is good news. So the bandsaw blade is designed to run on the rubber tyres that we're going to fit, and these tyres are fitted into a recess in the rim of the metal wheels, and these pulley wheels and the bandsaw blade are accessed by removing the safety covers, which we'll do next. So to get started on the job, the first thing to do is to disconnect the power supply, and then you can open up the covers to reveal two pulley wheels that we're going to put the tyres onto. These are two latches need to be undone. These are very stiff, these latches. There's a top one and a bottom one. So this is the top latch. It's quite stiff, you can see. And this is the bottom latch. So now the covers have been removed, we can see the two pulley wheels on which we'll be putting the rubber tyres. If you look on the right hand side of the screen, you can also see the saw blade adjustment knob having been identified, and also the saw blade as well. The saw blade obviously is going to have to be removed so we can fit the tyres. So here we've got close-ups of the top wheel and the bottom wheel. In particular, we've identified the recess that the tyre is going to fit into, and also there's a little brush on the bottom wheel which is probably there to get rid of sawdust and such like from operating the machine itself. So to remove the bandsaw blade, we need to untension the saw blade, which is done by turning the knob identified in the picture on the right hand side of the screen, and that moves the wheel downwards and helps you get the blade off. The next step is to use the adjustment mechanism which is round the back of the saw and identified on the right hand side of the screen to move the red blade guide halfway between the head and the table. So basically just move it up as shown in the central picture of the screen. The next step is to remove the saw blade cover, and this is done by loosening the two screws identified in the yellow circle in the picture on the left hand side of the screen, and removing this just makes it easier to unthread the saw blade at the table end of the table part of the saw. So here you can see the saw blade having sort of fallen off the two wheels, still held in the table. This video is showing the saw blade being removed without the saw blade cover having been taken off, and you can see it just makes it a little bit more difficult to get the blade out than it would be if you'd taken the cover off. That's the saw blade moved from the table end. So fitting the tyres onto the pulley wheel was really relatively straightforward and was achieved using just finger power. They stretched reasonably easily, and I didn't need to heat them up or anything like that. So in the sense of installation, much better than the urethane tyres that the machine came with. Now fitting the blade onto the pulley wheel then it involved rethreading it around the pulley wheels and putting the saw blade through both the upper and lower blade guides, which are shown on the right hand side of the screen. Having got the saw blade in, then lightly tension it, and what you can see is the guide adjustments, which are screws circled in yellow, need to be adjusted, and this should be done trying to get the carbon as close as possible to the blade without it actually touching. So the other thing that you need to think about is the support bearings, which the one for the lower support is identified by a yellow circle around it, and this prevents the blade being pushed back when you're cutting, and you need to adjust this so that there is a gap of 1/32 of an inch between the blade and the bearing. 1/32 of an inch is 0.8 millimeters, and in the manual it does state that the saw blade will be damaged if the teeth hit the blade guide, so really it's important to get this adjusted correctly. Now it's clear that the blade will almost certainly not be centered when you initially fit it, and the alignment adjuster for this is around the back of the machine, has been circled in yellow on the right hand side of the screen. And you'll also find out that the top wheel feels like the bearing is completely gone because it wobbles about, but once you tension it up and align it, this movement all ceases to be a problem. So if you want to adjust it, if the blade is moving towards the front, then if you turn it clockwise, that'll move it backwards, and obviously vice versa. If it's moving backwards, and you want to do the opposite. So the video that you can see running at the moment is really just showing you the sort of saw tension that's in the blade once it's adjusted. There seems to be some interaction between the tension of the saw blade and also adjusting where on the wheel the saw blade was running. Needed to play with these two things together until you got it so it ran in the middle of the tyre. And if you inspect the guides that are illustrated in this video, you'll see their adjustment is required. Carbon brushes are not set to be parallel and that close to the blade itself. So the next thing to do is just to test to see whether the machine actually operates. So the saw seems to be operating as would be expected. You have to realize that when I was doing the sawing, I was using one hand on the camera and one hand on the saw, which is why it all looked a little bit shaky. But anyway, the tyres certainly seem to work. The proof of the pudding will be how long they last. Do they last as long as the urethane ones, which the saw originally came with? So in summary, we've shown that rubber tyres are relatively easy to fit. Exactly how long they'll last has yet to be proved, and obviously that just will be something that we'll be able to do over time. So I hope this video has been helpful. Just bear in mind it's one way of doing the job. It's not necessarily the best.